So here we're talking about reasons and persons, which is an excerpt from a book by Derek Parfit, and I believe by the same name. And there's a lot to go through here. It's a very challenging text. It's been challenging for me, and we'll try to make enough sense of it to talk about it in a helpful way. And there will be future videos that will at least look at parts of the text in detail. I think if we were to go through it in its entirety, it was entirely too much time. But what is this text about? It's about time. It's about time, and it's up to us to relate it to the specific subject of death, although that is rather easy in some respects, maybe not so easy in others. But it's about time, and it's about the fact that we, as living beings, are in time. That is, that we are temporal beings. And I suppose that for the purposes of the reading, the most important aspect of us being temporal beings is that we look into the future, that is, we look forward in time, and we look back into the past. We look backward in time. That is, we think of our lives temporally as having a future and having a past. We have memories of past experiences, and we anticipate future experiences. And I think really the basic issue that's involved here is how we regard the same experience differently depending on whether it's in the future or in the past. And that is, you'll see he has these very clever hypotheticals which will come up again in next week's reading, or the next reading scheduled, Why is Death Bad? By Bruckner and Fisher. But he has these very clever hypotheticals that he asks us, these thought experiments. He asks us to think them through, and you should think them through yourself. They all have to do with raising questions about or revealing certain biases that we have about the future as opposed to the past. That is, the very same experience. Let's say the very same experience of pleasure or the very same experience of pain has very different values for us depending upon whether that experience is something that has happened, that is in our past, or something that will happen, something that is in our future. I think what Parfit is interested in are those biases themselves, how we do regard things as being better or worse depending upon whether they're in the past or the future, the different values we put upon them. And he's very concerned with the rationality of our temporal biases, and that's something that is a very interesting topic, I think, and something you should pay close attention to. One of the things that he's pointing out here is number one, generally speaking, we are biased towards the future. That is, we care more about events that are in the future than we care about events that are in the past. That is, that it's more important to me to know that I have, let's say, an hour of suffering that I will undergo tomorrow than an hour of suffering that I have undergone yesterday. That is, I care more about the hour of suffering if it's in the future than if it's in the past. And that's why we would say that would be one example of a temporal bias towards the future. That is, future events, generally speaking, are more important to me. They get my attention in a way that past events don't. And thinking about why that's so, and thinking about, again, whether it's rationally defensible is a big part of this reading. I think that Parfit clearly thinks that it is rationally defensible for us to be biased towards the future, to care more about events in the future than in the past, and he's very concerned with defending that. But he's also in a very interesting way, suggests a couple of things about that. First of all, that we happen to be biased towards the future in a very deep way, and he suggests that that's a result of evolution. Well, he doesn't explain that, I don't think. So we are biased towards the future. So for beings like us who are biased towards the future, it is fully rational to to care more about future suffering than we care about past suffering. But that it's perfectly imaginable that there could be a being, and perhaps there are human beings like this, although I rather doubt it. I think he probably rather doubts it too. But it's perfectly imaginable that there could be a human being or a conscious being of some sort who did not have a bias towards the future. What does he call this? I think he calls this hypothetical person timeless. That is, somebody who regards experiences in a temporally neutral way. Somebody who cares no more about the fact that an experience is in the future because it's in the future. Somebody who might, for instance, this big example is that if we know that we have an hour of suffering in the future, we anticipate that with dread. If we learn that we have had, in this sort of complicated way that he sets up in his hypothetical, if we learn that we have had an hour of suffering in the past, we are indifferent. That is, we're not upset in the way that we would be if we knew that we had an hour of suffering to come in the future. It's fully imaginable, at least according to Parfit, that there could be persons, like this hypothetical person, timeless, who didn't think that way, who felt just as bad, let's say if they were informed that they have had an hour of suffering in the past, as they would if they were informed that they would have an hour of suffering in the future. That's perfectly rational too. Perhaps not for beings like us, but that there's nothing in itself irrational about it. So I think that when you're trying to get a hold of this reading, keeping a few things in mind is a good idea. First of all, it is about time. And it's about how we sort things out in time in terms of how much we value or how much we care about an experience according to whether it's in the future or in the past. That is something that really is the whole subject of this reading and examining that temporal bias that we seem to have, looking at alternatives. And he has a very interesting suggestion that our bias towards the future makes us less happy than we otherwise would be. That is, if we didn't have this temporal bias, if we valued our past experiences, or if they gave us or is important to us as our future experiences, then on the whole we would be happier, and there's a very interesting argument there. This is very difficult reading, and I'll be giving you some videos that hopefully will be some help in explicating some of the specifics of the argument, but I just wanted to suggest some things to keep in mind, and this thinking about time, this thinking about ourselves as temporal beings who have both past and futures, and looking into some of the details of that, and how that affects the way that we view our lives in general, I think has very great application to how we regard death, and leads to some really a deeper grasp of how we regard death. Because it's when you begin thinking about time, I think, and Nagel has already suggested this, of course, right, in a way. But when you start thinking about time, I think you bring your understanding of death to a different level. That is, when we see that our notions of death are very much connected with time and our grasp of time. So this, for whatever it will be, reading this excerpt from Parfit's book, whatever value that it has, I think it will at least have that value for us, is to start us thinking about time and its relationship to death.